I'm excited to be jumping into the third webinar for the Cost of Doing Business report. This is the second deep dive webinar. We're focusing on sections 2 and 3 today. So again, if you haven't downloaded the report yet and you want to, you can go to costofrestoration.com and pull that down. Hey, I was talking to Nicole offline, and RIA is in all 50 states now, which is very exciting. So members in all 50 states. That's an awesome announcement for a Thursday. So you can see our panelists here. We have Ben Justesen with DocuSketch and Justin Woodard, who is with Woodard Cleaning and Restoration. So kind of as a quick background, webinar number one, if you weren't there, was a full kind of understanding of the Cost of Doing Business report. It focused on how the report was done, how the data was anonymized, and highlighted profit distribution, company structure, revenue mix, those kind of things. A lot of kind of the background and foundation of building the report in partnership with Know How. And then the second webinar went over financial benchmarks, performance analysis, dug into revenue mix, TPA participation, those kind of things. So this session, we are hoping to kind of examine true profitability drivers that are beyond revenue, link pricing, overhead, and training investments to your business outcomes, and provide some really, really good takeaways for your 2025 planning. Now I get to have the fun job of reading the antitrust statement. So hang in here with me really quick. It is the policy of the RIA to comply with the letter and spirit of all applicable federal, state, and international trade regulations and antitrust laws. All activities or discussions occurring under the auspices of the association shall be conducted in compliance with the letter and spirit of the RIA's antitrust policy and shall refrain from discussing topics which might be construed as tending to raise, lower, or stabilize prices, regulate production, allocate markets, encourage boycotts, foster unfair trade practices, assist in monopolization, or in any way violate federal, state, or applicable international trade regulations and antitrust laws. Any activities of the association or association-related actions of its officers, directors, staff members, invited speakers, or other contributors which violate these regulations and laws are detrimental to this industry and contrary to RIA policy. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, again, I kind of went through what our goals were for today. These sessions are recorded, so you can go back and watch the previous sessions. This one is also being recorded, so if you missed one, that's okay. There's still time to go back and review those. So, okay, at this point, I think I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to toss it over to Justin and Ben. So, which one of you gentlemen wants to kind of take it away and kind of give the overall goal for today before we start going through the charts?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do so. Yeah,
Okay.
good. We got back to the session goals.
Yep.
We have, we I think that what we were trying to do is to make sure that we'd have a little bit of time for things that are beyond just talking about the revenue. And dive into some of the data that is coming out of the report that has some experience based in pricing, based in overhead, and based in training, and other things that go into operating a restoration business. And so, from my perspective, I think Ben and I both have some relevant experiences inside of the businesses that we have operated. We are really fortunate, I think, today to have Ben on the call because he also has. He brings an expertise around custom pricing and how to think about pricing from a restorer perspective. And so I think we'll get to hear a little bit about his perspective and his experiences. And then I think there's also kind of a note here is there are, when we're talking about the overhead part of our businesses, those are things where we don't necessarily have a job that we're doing right now. When you're talking about revenue, you're talking about margins, you can talk about the jobs that you have going on right now, and you could potentially do something immediately. Well, the things that we're talking about today, those actually may have more to do with if you look out at the 2026 and you look out at the years beyond, you will have an opportunity to use some of this information to be able to look at your business, look at where you are, and look at where you want to go, and then make decisions about what to invest in next. And so there's a little bit more thought that can go into this part of planning where you may not have to make a decision today about a specific job or to work on margin in a very specific area. This is actually how you operate your business. And we've got, hopefully we have a couple of experiences that'll be relevant to the folks on the call today. Ben, anything to add before we get started?
Just one thing, I think that it is important for all of us to utilize this as, kind of a comparison. There are books out there that talk about making business a game, and I'm very competitive. So when I look at these numbers, I'm thinking, how can I be better? How can I be better than the average? And I think we've talked about in the future with this report having kind of like the median, but maybe the top 25% to see, what are those top players doing? So in the future, but it's for us that really want to gain an advantage by looking at what everybody else is doing and then trying to beat it, right? What can we do better? I think that's what this is about.
Perfect. Okay, so let's dive into some of the stats here. Go for it, gentlemen. I'm not sure which one of you. We didn't like divvy this up as much as maybe we should have, but I go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if we start with some of the results here, I think when I look at the chart on the right hand side, the cluster of revenue per employee having to do with having it all clustered. Actually, I thought was an interesting kind of data point when I think about, hey, we're sharing this with the industry. If you do the calculation and you are not kind of in in these bands, it actually could tell you something because you may be actually performing way better than the other parts of the folks that took the survey, or it might actually offer you an insight into your business to say, hey, with the number of people that I have, I actually should be producing more revenue, and that could actually lead to an insight that could cause you to take some sort of action. So I thought this was a really nice thing that really, regardless of the size of your company, there's really a kind of a cluster around this, $250,000 to $300,000 per FTE headcount that I think is actually meaningful. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I was actually on the phone yesterday with a brand new member of the RIA. He reached out to me. I don't know how he got my number, but it's okay. And I think he was surprised that, I got right back to him. And he wanted to know, about pricing, about estimating, and just in general with the RIA. And I let him know about the cost of doing business report, which he hadn't heard of yet because he's brand new. And he was trying to figure out the labor rate calculator and how am I supposed to understand this? He's a startup. And I said, well, this is a good place to start that might give you some averages. Now, as a startup, I will tell you yours will be likely very different from what the cost of doing business survey is because your overhead's going to be extremely low. At least that's my hope starting up. He's like, yeah, me and my buddy, we're partners and we're on every job. I'm like, yeah, so your overhead's going to be really low. But this right here, the average revenue per employee, you can actually kind of compare company to company no matter what size. I have seen much higher, I have seen lower. It just depends on how the business is set up. And so, but this is a great indicator that I really enjoy no matter what the numbers are. I'm like, yeah, I want to know how much is being produced by employee.
Do either of you have any kind of gauge of that 50 to 99 point? It kind of goes up a little bit again. The annual revenue in that window goes up again for the 50 to 99 person company. Any kind of insight on that window of why it might be a little higher there and then it kind of goes back down to where it was before? It could be a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean, to me, it feels like, I mean, it's inside of 10% or so, maybe a little bit higher. So I don't, frankly, I just look at the kind of the top and the bottom and say, okay, the 1 to 9 is probably a little higher, as they do have, generally speaking, a little less overhead. And so when I see this, I look at it and say, okay, we've got a range of somewhere around 240 to 300, a little over 300,000 per employee, and I say, okay, that actually feels like a pretty good range from my experience. And looking to push the envelope on that as we're working to get a little bit more efficient. I think that to me that's a pretty good guidepost for restoration companies.
If we were to look at last year's, these numbers were better. So we did see higher overhead this year. And so uh, I think because revenue has dropped for some companies, that it increases, like if you had the same exact overhead as the year before, but your revenue decreases a little bit, your overhead does go up as a percentage. That's what we're seeing. And so it's not really cause for alarm. It's just, all right, let's get our sales back in order and we're going to be fine, right? There's other companies that are like, oh, we're not fine. We've got to, reduce overhead so that everything is right sized. So there's just different ways to look at it. So again, it's just one piece of the puzzle. This is not everything, right? You got to look at all of it to make your decisions.
Yeah, Ben, in your experience, so if we pretend we're a restoration company of varying sizes, and we're looking at these, and we have our um, I'm looking at I did the calculation for my company, and it said that I'm actually only doing 175 or $200,000 per employee of revenue. There's a couple of different factors that we could look into to say, hey, how do we make an impact that might not just be, oh, I need to get rid of a couple of people, right? The
Right.
way to impact that would be to potentially increase revenue. And so maybe this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about estimating or pricing in how that actually could, if you look into this data and say, hey, you know what, it's not where I would like it to be. I'd like to improve it a little bit. What are some of the levers that you think we could pull or we could have folks to look into that might be beneficial?
So where I work at now and what I did with my business, and also in a later slide that we're going to look at, it talks about the average dollar per estimate, right? And I think it was I don't remember if it was averaging just mitigation and just repairs or if it was all lumped together. But I think that based on my experience, we're missing things that are in the scope. So let's we can talk about, okay, is our pricing correct and what do we need to do to affect that? But I find that that affects my estimate by maybe 4 to 5%. It's not a huge amount in most cases. For some, it could be more just geographically speaking. What I see is really missing. So when I teach classes and we review estimates that we've never seen before, we are increasing those estimates because of scope, because of what's missing in the scope. And I am telling you, it could be maybe 5%. There's some really good estimates out there, but we are seeing up to 40%. And that to me is really scary. So when you look at the jobs and you're looking at, again, just look at a different indicator to try and figure out how can I increase this average gross revenue per employee? Well, take a look at your estimates. When I looked at the average, and I believe it was separated out for mitigation, I saw a lot of them ranging in the, maybe 5,000, maybe up to 10,000. Oh, thank you. And I was like, okay, so we saw a decrease in all the higher ones, and it went like a huge increase, 15% more in the 5K. And I'm like, did we get more sloppy? Did our jobs just reduce in size? So I don't know. It's just an indicator to look at, but my assumption would be a portion of this is scope. We need to right size whatever our scoping techniques are, and make sure that we're capturing all the things that need to go in there. That's what I see. Um, Again, in what I am doing now, that's a big problem, right? I'm just not seeing good documentation from the field. We also experienced that in our own business, and we pulled some levers to make sure that wasn't happening anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good place. So that's on the top end side. The other thing that when we go into that overhead section, one of the other things that this could provide some insight is we are doing this at a aggregate level, right? But this exercise of the number of dollars of revenue per person can also be taken down into different areas of the company, right? And so you
Yeah.
could actually use this same thing and go look and say, hey, you know what? You could look at the number of marketing people as a percentage of the number of marketing people and divide that by the revenue and see how much each marketing person is doing. You could do that for estimators. You could do that for project managers. And so one of the things I like about this, the report, is that it actually gives a little bit of a framework for you to look into your business and say, oh, how do I apply this to my business in a little bit more detail? And and what could happen is you could actually look into the detail and then see that you're actually, your marketing folks, those FTEs are producing at like $1 million per employee, and your
Right.
estimators are way deep. They're
Yes.
much less. And so then you can ask yourself the question, or you can call folks like Ben, or you can call your friend and say, hey, if you do this in the marketing group, what's a good target for the marketing FTEs? And what's a good number for the estimating FTEs? That also allows you to then, once you kind of get a range there, you could say things like, you know what, I kind of have a range for my estimators. And instead of adding on an estimator to bring that down, you could actually go out and you could outsource part of the estimating until you get to a revenue line where it justifies adding another person. So I think
Yes.
the kind of the punchline of some of these overhead things really has to do with, if you're looking at this from a business owner perspective, where do I invest my next dollar of overhead? If you are looking to grow and if you're looking to do a little bit more, you can use these sorts of data to assess your business and see where you might be overinvested or underinvested. And that might actually open your eyes to a bottleneck that exists inside of your organization. Because if your marketing folks are very, very high when it comes to an FTE per revenue, that actually might tell you that they are pulling in, more than their fair share, and you've got great ones. But it also might say that you actually have some extra room there that you could invest in marketing to actually go after more revenue.
Justin, really quick, when you say FTE, you mean full-time employee, right?
Yeah, I think the full-time employee or full-time equivalent. Yeah, yes.
What would a full-time equivalent be?
It is a standard to say how many people you have. And so a full-time equivalent is just one person, and one person is generally, I think, 2,080 hours. And so if you have two part-time people, if you use them as two for your divisor, it doesn't give you the full picture because you have two people when they're actually only doing the work by an hour perspective of one person. And so we kind of equalize the data by saying FTE or just grouping them into 2,080 hour blocks.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that's also kind of considering what other people are doing as overtime. You may have one person or five people, but they're all putting in 80 hours a week. Well, is that really you have five people or are you just overworking the hell out of them, right? And
Correct.
then Nate Judy was asking, what are your thoughts on ARPE and factoring those in-house versus subcontracted? So that's kind of where Justin was going with that, is you have to look at it more like per department, or in this case, look at it per overhead employee rather than every employee in your company. That might be an easier way of looking at in-house versus subcontracted. Just look at what is your revenue per overhead employee, and that'll give you uh, maybe what that is or what it should be for your company. This is really a lot of historical data that you should be keeping for your own company. So you're measuring against yourself, just like running a race. Yeah, you might be running against the top guy in the world, but how about you just look at your personal best and keep getting better with that? Because that's what really matters is what you can do.
Perfect.
Great.
Okay. So there was a quick question diving a little bit more into which, Ben, I'm guessing that you see it. So when we were talking about the FTEs, I feel like these are different. So they were asking if it can be is it the equivalent of like a virtual estimator, I believe is what they're asking, or a bookkeeper. I'm thinking the virtual estimator is not a payroll person. That's more of an outsourced type person versus a bookkeeper, which might be on the payroll, right? So there is a difference there.
Yeah, and it's really up to you whether you add that into your staff or whether you just keep it separate as an overhead.
Okay, perfect. All right, have we made it through all the charts here? We've been all
Yeah,
over.
I think we could touch on that one that you were just on, Michelle, the one that describes the overhead as a full percentage of revenue.
Okay.
The one before this one, I believe. And so this one,
Yep.
the blue, sorry, one more. Yeah, this one. Yeah, the dark blue here is representing the total overhead expenses as a percentage of gross revenue. And so this again, I think, you know, uh, this is the evidence that we have that we are able to gather from throughout the industry that really describes what is the overhead that it takes to run a emergency services company. Right, we all know that the overhead is high, and this kind of proves it. And I think to Ben's point, I believe this also was a little bit of an increase as an overall percentage from our prior results in the fiscal year for 2024, which was last year's survey. But as you can see, under $20 million, we've got folks that are sharing with us that their overhead as a percentage of their overall revenue is 37 to 41%. And there's a little bit of a benefit, it looks like, or maybe a sweet spot, at least in the data that we had between 20 and $100 million, that overhead goes and actually dips a little bit below 30%. Um, Ben, could you maybe share from your experience, as you're looking at these numbers, and then the other, the company that you ran for a while, but then also in the consulting you've seen from throughout the industry, what is this consistent with good perform like top performance? Like when if you're thinking about this from a resource perspective, if we're shooting for 30% overhead as a percentage of revenue, is that a good target? Should we be trying to do better than that? Is what's happening in the industry right now that so many companies are struggling even to get to that 30% mark?
Yeah, I think there like this kind of goes into a tangent maybe, but no, I don't think these numbers are great. I think as an industry, we need to look at lowering our overhead. And I think what's happening is uh, a lot of, I think software's a part of the issue. Like we all talk about integration, but how much integration is actually happening? Justin, how many software do you use in your company? It's too many, right? And so each company is looking at that, and then there's a redundancy in what the field staff is doing, what the overhead staff is doing. And so I think overhead's kind of gotten out of control, and we're all trying to figure out how do we make this better? How do we reduce the overhead in dollars, not by getting rid of people, but how do we implement software better? How do we get our people to be more efficient? Um, I just think this is way too high. I would shoot for, 30 might be a good number, but even lower, like I think it should be in the high 20s to be healthy. Because if you start going over this, I can tell you right now that so this goes into O&P, that conversation. Now, part of this was saying maybe O&P as 20% is outdated. I don't necessarily think 20% is outdated. I don't know what the right percentage is at the end of an estimate. That's just a markup. Obviously, it's not our overhead and not our profit together, right? We've proven that. So it's not that those percentages are wrong, it's that the name for it is wrong, right? And you guys know I'm on my soapbox, my own soapbox with that. I'm not going to change the industry probably on changing the name of O&P at the end of the estimate, but what is a fact is it's not overhead and profit. Those are margin terms. So because we've proven with this report last year, this year, that doesn't actually reflect real overhead and profit, well, where does our overhead and profit, the general overhead and net profit, come from in our estimate? Because when we look, we can see that our gross profit is, right around the 40, I think next year we could probably make it so that it's a smaller brackets for the gross profit. But I think we're pretty close as an industry, as an average. I think it said 30 to 45% or something on this report. So I think that's true. So if we're only getting 20% markup at the end of the estimate, which is 16.67%, where is the rest of the profit coming from? And if we are at 40s for our overhead and we try to make our own price, we will outprice ourselves out of the market. So you can't just expect to make a price for whatever your overhead is if it gets out of control. You have to manage that. You have to reel that back in to be consistent with the rest of your market. You can't just charge whatever you want. So that's really important to me to look at from this report.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Michelle, I can actually do both at the same time. So, yeah, thanks, Ben. And we have, just to revisit one more time, we've got a question in the chat about this difference between the average gross revenue per employee by FTE headcount from the 1 to 9 section and the ones with more employees. And I think the person that put in the chat, I think, is correct. I think a fair conclusion to draw here is that there is a large increase in the overhead that happens as you get from 10 to 24, and that actually brings that average revenue per employee down. So if you think about it, if you go from
Wait,
9,
so your revenue shouldn't go down because your overhead goes up.
no,
Your
the
revenue.
average revenue per employee, I think, is what they were saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you move from 9, if you've got $1 million of revenue and you have 9 people, and then you stay at $1 million and you go to 14 people, you're going to dramatically change
Your overhead. Yeah.
your overhead. And that small section, you may be adding 2 people at a time as you try to grow, and so you're potentially trying to catch back up to that average revenue per
Yeah.
overhead employee. Yeah. Okay. All right. The next part, Ben, I think it's okay to move on. The other part that we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about has to do with how we are spending money outside of just the employees and the overhead. And that one of the big ones there is learning and development, or training. And so we actually have some pretty good data around how companies at different sizes are spending their money from a training perspective. And I think maybe one of the places to start here is, like, Ben, if you think about your experience, the folks on the call can look at the numbers. We don't have to regurgitate all of the different numbers. But I think the fact of the matter is if we spend money on our employees, we actually can see that we can grow our company. We can, by growing our people. Are there anything, when you think back in your experience, are there anything that you can point to that we can share with the folks today that really had a big impact on your company that kind of is borne out by some of this data? Where would you invest, I guess, when you're talking about training, and what's been impactful and created an ROI for your team in the past?
So, being in the industry as long as I have, I've just made a lot of friends with people that are trainers or the best at whatever they do. And so we always sought those people out as who we would send our people to. But we would try to bring them to our office, and we would actually invite our competitors to join us. So I think, that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but I think that was a key to the success for us and having our competitors there. I think it just raised all ships in our area. There was a consistency in service and what we do on the project. And so I thought it was great, whether it be lead renovation training, it could have been a HERA certification, water damage training. We built our own. It wasn't a house, but it was an old RV trailer, a big one, and then we tore it all down because it was a fire damaged trailer, and we built it like a house. Like, it's so heavy. I can pull it down the road, but it's about the heaviest thing I've ever pulled down the road. We flood it, and so I like doing in-house training as long as you are structured with it. A lot of people are using software which is great having those videos. It's easy for people to get trained up pretty quickly, but I also find that it doesn't get used if it's not part of a scheduled program. And if the manager is not involved with it of whatever department, then it doesn't work. It fails. Everybody's happy. Hey, we've got this, but when nobody's using it, doesn't mean anything. So it's got to be implemented as part of a process. Then it works. And doing it constantly, consistently, whether it be in your weekly meetings, monthly rah-rah meetings, whatever it is, training.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the things that I noticed in this data, if you look at the second line here, the companies between $1 and $5 million, that represents by a lot of the data that we have, a very average size for the restoration companies when you look across the entire country. And one of the things I was really happy to see in the data is that orange section, the conferences and events, where that size company is actually spending money there. I would share that from our experience. When I look back, one of the lessons that I learned from my dad was that the best learning comes from connecting with other people in the industry. And the best way to do that, the best bang for your buck, is to attend a conference. It is to attend an event where you actually get a variety of restorers from all over the country that you can talk to. And when you bring your people to those events, it does two things. One, it doubles down on the number of people that you can talk to from your company with other people in other companies, but it also shares with your team that you value them, that you want to invest in their future, and you want to teach them about the industry, and they get to go connect with people. The lasting benefit then comes when they come back home and they have that phone number from the people that are at the conferences or at the event that they got to connect with. And when they have that question, if they have a peer in the industry that they can call, they can actually kind of supercharge their learning throughout the year because they have that connection. So I was really, really happy to see that. It looks like, in some ways, it looks like the $1 to $5 million company is over investing in that conferences and events, and it might just be a higher percentage of the training dollars. But to me, that tells me that the folks in the industry are actually, this kind of secret is out, that it is really going to network and be with other people around the industry. That's where you get the best info. That's where you get the best learning. That's where you get the best bang for your buck, because you've got all those people at once in one place, and you can educate together. Let's see. The other one that the external training. It actually, I was a little surprised again at how consistent these bands are. Outside of the one outlier of the massive amount, it seems like the large companies are spending on software. We're kind of clustered in kind of the same spot, and so it looks like folks are spending money on external trainers, whether they're bringing them into their own office, like Ben described, and inviting their competitors are in. One thing I think I would share from an experience perspective, the Xactimate training is an interesting example of that potential tactic that Ben described. If you get somebody to come into your company that can teach people about Xactimate, and you actually invite your competitors in, and you teach everybody in your market to give Xactimate feedback about what is actually happening in that market, it actually could be a little kind of an inside way to raise the Xactimate pricing through that market. If you deliver better information to Xactimate, they can better estimate what the costs are in that market, and then you can see changes to that based on all of the feedback from your area.
We are going to be producing some more training soon through the RIA. Maybe a little bit about pricing. We'll have to see.
Yeah, we've got a suggestion in the chat of potentially getting a little bit more granular detail from the survey in the future to describe what kind of external training is happening. Let's see, we've got one other thing in the chat describing we are seeing companies increase their project gross profit percent by 15 to 20% from project manager training. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So experience share in the chat around, what does it take? What is one way to improve the performance of a project? Have that project run more smoothly. And, Ben, in my experience, that would be some combination of scope, right? Making sure that we actually describe the scope properly so that then we can estimate it really, really clearly, and include everything in that estimate. We can then put together a schedule really, really well so that job runs on time. If we can get that job to run on time, then we can have a happy customer. And if that happy customer signs the certificate of satisfaction more quickly, we can potentially get to agreement with the billing and get paid more quickly, and the whole thing can work a little bit more smoothly. And what is the intersection of all those things? Is exactly what was put in the chat, that if we train our project managers on all of those steps and have high expectations about how they take the project through each of those steps, we can actually improve margin as a result.
And what he's showing, that much of a margin, that's huge. But that tells me that, and I've seen it in this industry, utilizing these estimating software have made us very lax in how we scope jobs, right? We start putting in uh, category codes, selector codes, and just expect it to have what we need. But if you put in like a flood cut, into the software and you put only 8 linear feet to replace it, well, that's only giving you half a sheet of sheetrock. It gives you zero point 0.2 boxes of mud. It gives you maybe 40 minutes of labor. But, I entered it correctly. So we're thinking because we did the data entry correctly that it's a good estimate. And I'm a great estimator. That's not it. You have to know what does that estimate yield? Does the budget actually give you what you need to perform that project correctly? And then Justin, with the scheduling piece, that's music to my ears because if you're not on schedule, stuff starts going bad with the customer. So many jobs I don't even see with a schedule. I'm like, show me your scheduling on this. I go and visit a company and they don't have anything. I'm like, didn't you not give them a Gantt chart? Did you not at least send an email saying we're going to try and be done by this point? Like something. And so many of these projects don't even have that. And I'm like, the customer's going to be pissed. They think you should be done tomorrow because they've watched way too many shows on TV that show them it can be done in a day, right? Or whatever the non-realistic expectation is, not knowing that there was weeks and months put into planning for any of those TV projects. So when the customer gets upset, profitability goes down. And that right there, the scheduling part, I think is probably the biggest reason customers get upset. In fact, when you look at JD Power and Associates and how they rank the insurance companies, time. That is the biggest piece that they are ranked on is time, because as time goes on, those customers are less and less satisfied. And so that's one of the big things that they get judged on.
Yeah, so true. So true. Okay, I'm looking over the notes that I have here. I think the last maybe thing in this section to at least point out, I don't believe we have a graph on this part, but there is a little bit more information in this section of the report that talks a little bit about compensation. And though we don't have exact compensation data for all the different roles, one of the questions that we asked had to do with what sort of bonuses are you paying? And there's some information about the differences between different company strategies around paying annual bonuses and paying performance-based bonuses. And so if you do have the report, you can kind of look into this and kind of see that there's some different ways that folks do it. But I think maybe for our purposes here, Ben, what would you do you have like a mental framework that you think about when you think about bonuses, whether we're talking about project managers, or we're talking about technicians, or we're talking about overhead folks, like what sort of insight or experiences that do you have that you might be able to share that have that you've seen work or not have the impact that you were hoping they would?
Um, I have seen many different ways. I've tried different ways. What I will tell you on this is it's very dependent on your culture. It's very dependent. So whatever those core values are that you really have, not aspirational values, I'm talking, these are true values. You know that this really exists in your company. It's inherent with your people. And if you aren't hiring that way, it's not going to work. Like you can have a great structured bonus plan, but if you don't hire the right people for that plan, it's not going to work because they weren't a right fit for your culture. Uh, the way I did it is I really didn't do a lot of incentives. I just paid people really well. And that follows the logic of Daniel Pink. I don't know if anybody's read his stuff or listened to his videos. There's a short 10-minute video on YouTube uh, that talks about what motivates people by Daniel Pink. And it just explains there's been study after study. If you just give people a carrot or you whip them, like we're just smarter horses. Is that what you're trying to say? Like, so he says it when all these studies have been done and you just give more money, performance actually gets worse in some cases, right? Now, if it's just it doesn't require a lot of critical thinking to do that job, then it works. But if you have to figure out a solution for something, and all that pressure is on you to make the money based on getting an incentive, performance actually starts reducing. So, anyways, again, that's a culture thing. In our culture, I just tried to pay people really well. In fact, even my project managers, this will sound weird because I know most people have them on salary plus some kind of commission or bonus. I didn't. I just paid them hourly. Yeah, that's weird. And so they felt like they were compensated for their time because they might put in a lot of overtime because of the emergency work or whatever that comes in. Everybody felt like they were treated fairly. When somebody says, I want to go on salary because they think it's some kind of promotion, I'm like, no, here's the math. And so we would explain the math, go over the dollars with them. I'm like, all I'd be doing is taking advantage of you, right? Now, if you make bonuses or whatever, great. But if you don't make that, like I just want to have you here if you perform well. If you don't perform well, go find another place where you can be successful. And so that's what we implemented, and it went really well. But I've seen other companies. There's one company I'm thinking of, and they're like a company of maniacs. They all love the incentives, and it works incredibly well. But I think they hired for that. That's their culture. And so you can't just say, all right, I'm gonna have, you're going to get a bonus based on this GP. And one thing, you can't make it complicated. If you put 5 indicators to a bonus, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. I promise you it won't work. But that's what we're trying to do is, all right, here's all the indicators. I want you to perform at this. That's just their job. We're trying to say you get some special treatment once you get to that. But there are some companies that make that work, but they make it simple, right? They only base it on here's the profit, or maybe they base it on 5-star reviews. The more you get, and it's very successful. I've seen another company, they have more 5-star reviews than any company I've ever seen, but the incentive was based on that, and they just made themselves were all about customer service. That was their why. And for us, it was more about the employees. We wanted to take care of them, so I wanted to pay them more. So that was the culture. So whatever your culture is, go off of that. Don't just you hear something that sounds good from another company and expect to implement that and work well. Not going to happen.
Yeah. Ben, thanks for the sharing. What I hear you saying is, if we're looking at this information, um, put it through the lens of your own company and your own personality and the type of environment that you're building, and make sure you're thoughtful about, anything that you experiment with. And that thoughtfulness could lead to a spot where you actually, maybe you try something new, but maybe you also, realize what is working for you may not work for everybody else. The other thing I hear you saying is like, if you have a whole bunch of things that have to be cleared, if you have a very complex compensation system, those tend to not work as well. They're either administratively heavy, and then you have a whole other burden on your company, or you have a situation where people don't even understand what their compensation is or how it's calculated, and that can be a demotivator as well. The last thing I heard you say was like, you know what, make sure it's something that's important to you as a company, or maybe said another way, that to me is kind of adjacent to that thing I think maybe a lot of us have heard is, you can make an impact on what you measure. right? So what you measure and what you reward can actually have an impact on behavior. And so if you are making some changes, make sure you're thinking about like if these things, if these things are true, what behavior is going to change, and are you rewarding the right behavior and the behavior that you want to see happen? All of those things seem to be important. Michelle, I see you're stopped here on a kind of what I find is an interesting little graph about the makeup of the companies that responded to our survey. And the couple of things I'll point out is we're kind of getting through this. I've got one other point, and then we'll kind of finish up with a little time for any additional questions. But as I see here, like when I look, we're talking about the less revenue at the top to more revenue at the bottom. The dark blue area is kind of heavier at the top and decreases as you go through the bottom, right? Maybe you have less executive as a percentage of the overall workforce, which that kind of tracks and makes sense. The orange bucket is, the administrative costs tend to get a little bit bloated. I think there is kind of a big company tax that comes along with trying to manage a much larger organization. That might have to do with offices in different areas of the country. That might have to do with, holding on to teams of people like a cat team that may not be able to produce revenue all year long. Maybe you have to have some of those carrying costs, and those end up in administration in some fashion. There's some other reasons why that could bloat a little. Maybe those folks, as you get bigger, one of the other things we saw in the earlier data is the referral sources actually need to increase for those larger companies. So they are taking on some of that TPA work as a higher percentage of their overall work to make sure that they have that work. And we know that the TPA work can tend to be a little bit more administratively heavy. And then the last thing I'll point out is actually the relative consistency of the sales and marketing, right? So 5 is kind of the low end, but like 8, 9, 10, 11% of the company is dedicated to sales and marketing, and that tracks with my experience. Where making sure that you're dedicating enough of the resources to that sales and marketing place is super important for companies that want to make sure to drive a consistent lead and referral sources, and make sure that they are investing enough to grow. I'll finally point out here, if you look back at that under $1 million one, I think my hypothesis is that the sales and marketing one is smaller and the executive one is bigger because they're actually overlapped. And that owner is operating as an executive and as one of the primary salespeople. So again, I think this data kind of bears out at least to my experiences. Ben, anything else you would add here? Or Michelle, please.
Well, go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
No, I agree with that. But I also find it interesting how the estimating kind of trends down as you get bigger. I think more and more companies are starting to utilize third-party estimating as they get bigger. It's very difficult to find those unicorns. And so it's almost like being able to subcontract your production, right? If you're able to do that, then that can be a really good answer for what you're trying to do so you can produce more volume. It's the same thing with estimating. If you get bottlenecked in trying to get your stuff invoiced because the estimator isn't getting done fast enough, or maybe you had to let one go, or you can't find the right one, whatever it may be. Anyway, so I see that. But yes, I agree with you on, as companies get bigger, it's getting to that size usually means they start getting multiple offices, right? And when I had multiple offices and my overhead got bigger just because of that. I'm like, if I had all this revenue in one office, I'd be making so much more money. But it's like, well, I wouldn't be producing the revenue either. So
true. We had a question in the chat about the number of companies that responded. I believe we had 100 to 125 companies respond. Ben, does that track with what you remember?
Yes.
Yeah, and that was very consistent. That number has been pretty consistent year over year. All right, so as we've got about 10 minutes left, and as we wrap up, I'd like to just share a couple of items about the RIA, but then also kind of transition. So if you got any last questions, please put those in the chat, and we will do our best to to address those. The first thing I'd like to say is that we have, 100, 125 companies. We know there's actually tens of thousands potentially of restoration companies out there. We have several thousand RIA members, and that's kind of the bulk of the folks that are our audience to be able to get participation in the future. But I can't stress enough. This data is only as good as the participation that we get, and so every year we are looking to get a few more people to participate in the survey. We know that there is a little bit less franchise representation than we would like, and we also we want to continue to have our Canadian friends. We want to make a special call out to them. We'd love to have them participate in greater numbers. But we will continue to do the best that we can to recruit as many people as possible to join the survey. Make the survey process of filling it out, as you can imagine, this is a lot of information for companies to provide. And so the process for filling out the survey is actually a little cumbersome. So we're going to be looking at how we improve that process. And we're also going to be looking at how we support that process with additional resources, because there tends to be questions, and being able to answer those questions in a timely fashion is something we are aware of that could make the process easier. We had more, I don't remember the number offhand, but we had more companies fill out half the survey than we really want. If folks are willing to start the survey, we want to make sure that we support them enough to finish the survey. And then the last thing that I would say here is download this resource, right? And what we alluded to a little bit throughout the thing is bring your team along, right? This information in the hands of an owner can be very helpful to the growth of a company. This information in the hands of the owner and in the hands of some project managers, in the hands of some estimators, in the hands of production managers, in the hands of people that get additional education about what this data means, to be able to foster that little bit of that competition and say, hey, we're not where we'd like to be or where our peers are in some of these metrics, and we'd like to pick one or two or three of them to work on in 2026. We're at the perfect time of year to be able to get your team together, review certain parts of this document that you feel like could provide improvement for your company, and then you can engage with your team and come up with some tactics that might work for you all to be able to go into 2026 and have a great year. Ben, what would you do? What would you say to conclude or to wrap us up? Any other final comments, or please, any other last questions? We'd love to hear from the folks on the call.
Yeah, I would like to see more questions if there are any. One of the panel questions we were supposed to have is what metric would you focus on? And I think we kind of made the point that I don't know that I would just focus on one. I think you need to look at multiple to make your decisions. I would also say, again, make it a game. Make it a competition. Try and do better, whether you're comparing yourself to yourself or to the other companies of the industry. That's something that drives me. I also just noticed that my background is on backwards, so.
It's not to us. Don't worry, because mine is.
Oh, it's not. Okay, good.
Don't worry. Okay, so I was going to ask the metric question, but I do want to dive in a little bit further to ask you both, because you've been involved in this and both been in the industry for a long time. What's one key takeaway? Like, if people are going through this and attending the webinars or reading the report, what do you hope, like, if you could pick one thing that you hope that they walk away with from this, what would you hope?
Ben, you want to go? You want to go?
Yeah, I would hope that I think Justin probably had the best point of this whole thing is get to conferences, right? Get to those networking events, because that's where you're going to learn the ins and outs of how these companies did what they did.
Yeah.
That's where I met the people that I brought into my company to do the training. That's where I met people that I got their phone number and I asked. I remember, Ernie Storr, that guy was a mentor for me. And to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's like the godfather of the industry, right? And he's helping little old me. there is so many people like that in the RIA that are willing to help, want to help, that you got to get to those conferences to meet them. Don't be bashful. It's not like, when I looked at Ernie, I'm like, oh, he's up here. That's not how he is, right? He understands. I asked him one time, do your employees know who you are? Like, I'm just like, I would be in awe working for you every day. He's like, Ben, they don't look at it that way. Like, that's ridiculous. And so, uh, you may have somebody that you look up to, just go up to them, introduce yourself, get some help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing that I'm taking away, or that I think is the most impactful thing about this survey, is this is an unusual set of data. You have 100 companies that have opened up their books. They've provided information about how their company is operating, and you get to compare your company to them. And so this is a treasure trove, right? If you are if to take the time and look at the key metrics and calculate them for yourself, you now have a benchmarking tool that very few other business owners in very few industries has. And we know that our businesses are all a little bit different and they are a lot the same. And so if you do the work to calculate these things and compare yourself to the benchmarks that we're able to share with you in this report, you will then be able to identify the one or two or three areas where you can have the biggest impact in 2026. And that's what you should go after. That's what you should share with your team. That's what you should educate yourself on. That's where you should reach out to the folks in the RIA and say, hey, how do I make an impact on this metric? I would love to be able to hear from you. So I think that's the thing I look at as the most important part of this whole report. Nate in the chat asked, like, what is the state of the industry based on the data, right? And so, the highlights from my perspective, aren't much different than what you have heard. I think if you've been to any of the RIA events, the AGA events over the last couple of months, if you've engaged with RIA in any way, I think the data is actually bearing out some of the things that we're saying. It is taking longer and longer for folks to get paid. We're seeing that in the way cash is being represented in some of the parts of this report. It is showing that cash is a little tighter. We are seeing that deductibles. We are hearing that deductibles are going up. They're becoming a percentage of overall values of properties, and that is causing people to not put smaller claims through insurance companies. We're seeing that bear out in this data. The number of those losses, you can kind of see how that number is changing over time. And so those losses aren't going through the programs. And so it's actually the companies that are doing less program work that are doing more of those smaller losses. And you can kind of see some of that evidence. We are seeing that the overall number of claims in the industry, based on what we're hearing from insurance companies, that's down. When we look at certain metrics inside of this data, that bears out where we've seen overhead go up a little bit. I don't think that's just because people are getting more efficient, even though we may have bought more software because we have a lot of it. It actually might have to do with some reduction in softness in revenue as well. So I have found that there are quite a few things that I am hearing in the industry that are actually borne out by this data. It looks like we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you all very much, Ben. Great to talk to you and kind of, hear from your experiences. I really, I think I got a little bit, every time I hear you talk, I take a little couple of nuggets away. And, obviously, Michelle, I always love seeing you.
Thanks for letting me be here. Thanks for all your insight, everybody. Costofrestoration.com if you want to download the report and you haven't. Thanks, everyone.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Take care. Merry Christmas.
Merry